Colombia, the country with the population of 51.27 million people. The Republic of Colombia has a presidential system of government. Colombia has more than 200 radio stations, more than 50 television channels and more than 50 newspapers. But does the Colombian press has freedom? The Freedom of Press Index presents an overview of the independence of the media and how free it is for journalists to do their job. In 2022, the Press Freedom Index of Colombia stood at 42.43. Colombia was among the 5 countries with the worst press freedom index in 2022. Journalism in Colombia is a very dangerous job. More than 89 journalists has been killed in Colombia from 1990 to 2020. 38 journalists, which is the most number of journalists, got killed in the era of 1990 to 2000 under the government of Cesar Gaviria and then Ernesto Samper Pizano. The first journalist to be killed in the 1990s era was Ismael Jaimes, killed in Magdalena Medio, Colombia on May 6, 1992. Jaramillo, deputy director of the newspaper El Sur in Pasto from June to August, was reported missing on October 24, 1997. His dismembered body was found the following week. Because of the gruesome nature of his murder, involvement by organized crime is suspected. Bernabe Cortez Valderrama, killed in Cali, Colombia, May 19, 1998. Cortez, a reporter for the nightly news program, Noticias CVN, was shot and killed as he was in a taxi outside his home in Cali. In November, Colombian police charged Julio Cesar Ospina Chavarro with the murder. Police searched his home and found the gun used in the killing. Drug traffickers hired him to kill Cortez. Ernesto Acero Cadena, killed in Armenia, Colombia, December 12, 1995. Acero, director of the weekly economics bulletin Informador and a veteran reporter, was killed in Armenia by an unknown assailant who shot him 3 times on the street and then fled. Acero's colleagues believe his murder may be related to his outspoken stance against corruption and his decade-long career as a journalist. Francisco Castro Menco, killed in Majagual, Colombia, November 8. Castro, president of the Cultural Foundation, a community foundation that ran daily radio broadcasts, was fatally shot in his home by unidentified killers. Local journalists believe he was murdered because of his appeals for peace but are unsure if guerrillas or the paramilitary are responsible. Gerard Bedoya Slayer, killed in Cali, Colombia, March 20. Bedoya, opinion editor of the Cali daily newspaper The Country and a harsh critic of drug trafficking, was assassinated as he was getting into his car by a gunman who shot him repeatedly. Colleagues said in a public statement that they believe that drug traffickers perpetrated the crime. Jaime Garzón killed in Bogotá, Colombia, August 13, 1999. 2 gunmen killed political satirist Jaime Garzón, host of a daily morning show on the Bogotá station Radionet and contributor to a television news program called Caracol Noticias. More recently, Garzón used his stature as a well-respected broadcaster to negotiate for the release of victims of guerrilla kidnappings. Before his death, Garzón had frequently been threatened by Carlos Castaño, leader of the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. The gunman who shot Garzón allegedly belonged to a criminal band known as La Terraza. Castaño admits he has hired the criminals. Oscar Garcia Calderón, killed in Bogotá, Colombia, February 22, 1998. Garcia, a bullfighting reporter for the Bogotá, was forced into a taxi by unidentified assailants as he was leaving the office. He was shot 3 times. In the year before his murder, according to colleagues, Garcia had uncovered links between drug traffickers and bullfighting and had proposed writing a book on the subject. Nelson Carvajal, killed in Pitalito, Colombia, April 16, 1998. Carvajal, a highly regarded radio journalist of Pitalito, was shot several times outside the elementary school where he taught. Carvajal was the producer of 5 community programs on Radio Sur. Carvajal also often reported on local government corruption scandals and money laundering by drug traffickers. Carvajal reported that the former mayor of Pitalito had misappropriated public funds.
Sierra, a deputy editor and columnist for La Patria newspaper in Manizales, a town in Colombia's coffee-growing region, was shot 3 times in the head in front of his daughter while walking to work on January 30th. He died on February 1st. Sierra wrote a Sunday column for the 80-year-old newspaper in which he frequently highlighted political corruption and human rights abuses following death threats in 1998. Sierra was assigned bodyguards for a short period but later stopped using them. Sanchez, 38, a host on local radio station Yumbo Estrio, was shot 3 times by a masked assailant outside his home in Yumbo. Witnesses said the assailant had been waiting in the bushes behind Sanchez's home, he said. Sanchez was taken to a local hospital and then to Vail University Hospital in the provincial capital, Cali, before dying at around midnight, Orozco said. Sanchez was host of 3 weekly programs. Notice Digestion and La Personeria, were civic education programs funded by the local government. The third, Mesa Redonda, was a community-based opinion program. Varela, the owner of Radio Meridiano 70, was shot and killed in northeastern Colombia. The journalist was driving home from the university graduation in Arauca department in the afternoon when gunmen yanked him from his car and shot him in the face and chest. Varela hosted 2 polemical news and opinion programs for the station in the town of Arauca and criticized all sides fighting in Colombia's civil conflict. 3 years ago, Varela's name appeared on a list of people that the paramilitary army had declared military targets. Varela, who was in his early 50s, was also the secretary of a provincial peace commission as well as its former president. Bravo, a 65-year-old investigative journalist with the regional Alpavision radio, was shot dead at around 8 p.m. by an unidentified gunman who sneaked into his house. The journalist was shot once in the head and twice in the neck. According to a friend of Bravo's, 2 weeks before he was killed, a man approached the journalist at his house and warned him to leave town. Bravo, who directed the morning television program Hecos y Cifras, Facts and Figures, for Alpavision, had frequently accused municipal and departmental government officials of mishandling public funds. Bravo also published an occasional newsletter focused on economics and finance called Eco Impact. 2 gunmen shot Maya, a journalist and a leader of the local indigenous community, in his home in rural Caloto. Maya, 34, was a correspondent for Radio Payamat, a community radio station. Maya covered political issues and the civil conflict in the region. No police investigation had been initiated as of early December. Maya covered political issues and the civil conflict in the region. Maya's news-gathering activities were closely tied to his role as an indigenous leader. Arroyave, 41, was stabbed early in the morning inside his home in Cartago. Although the journalist's laptop computer was missing, there were no signs of forced entry. Arroyave presented general political and social news that was not particularly critical of the government. The journalist also worked for the state environmental organization. A man posing as a delivery person entered Aguilar's home in southwestern Cauca province around 7:15 p.m., saying he had a package of photos to deliver. According to a video Hoyos, once inside, the assailant shot Aguilar 3 times and fled. The journalist died at the scene. Aguilar, 72, was a correspondent for Radio Super in the southern city of Pata. He also hosted a daily news program on the community radio station. The journalist had reported for Radio Super for 10 years and was known for his harsh criticism of corruption. Martin Aguilar, the journalist's son, told CPJ that his father had received death threats 2 years ago, but he did not know of any recent ones. Hoyos said Aguilar had not relayed any threats to him. Sandoval, a cameraman with RCN Television, died of gunshot wounds sustained while covering an April 11 firefight between the Colombian Army and leftist rebels. The journalists came under fire on April 11 at around 1:45 p.m. in a mountainous region outside the southwestern city of Cali, where the Army was pursuing fighters from the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC. The crew had decided to leave when an Army helicopter hovering above opened fire on their vehicle. The journalists then tried to signal the helicopter for help by waving white T-shirts in the air. 15 minutes after Lopez was shot, a bullet from the helicopter ripped through Sandoval's left leg, said Bautista. Costilla, 50, was shot by an unidentified gunman in the northern city of Monteria, according to local news accounts. The journalist was reading a book outside his house around 9 p.m. when the attacker shot him at least 8 times, the press said. A second man picked up the attacker and they reportedly fled on a motorcycle. Costilla died at the scene. Costilla, who also contributed to the local radio station La Voz de Monteria, had received threats for at least 4 years in relation to his coverage of links between local politicians, landowners, and illegal right-wing paramilitary groups. The government provided protection to Costilla from 2006 to 2009 because of threats against his life. Polanco Herrera, a television journalist, was shot 3 times by 2 unidentified men on motorcycles in his office parking lot at 1 p.m. Polanco, 37, broadcast a daily, hour-long local news program. Mersa told CPJ that despite the new format, Polanco's program maintained a close relationship with the mayor's office, and that Polanco himself was a personal friend to many local politicians. Polanco was not known to have received any death threats before his death. Flor Alba Nunez Vargas was shot outside radio station where she worked. Helmet-clad assassin can be seen casually walking away from the scene. Journalist, 25, was well-known campaigner against drugs and corruption. She had received death threats over recent coverage of a criminal gang. Nunez, 25, hosted an hour-long daily news program called Red Noticias, Network News, at La Preferida Estero station. She also reported for the local Channel 6 station and was a correspondent for Nasheen. Freelance reporter Quiroz died 7 days after being hospitalized for injuries suffered when he was arrested by police while uncovering a protest, according to press reports. Quiroz, 31, lapsed into a coma and died of a heart attack. He was a part-time journalist for Noticias, a nightly cable TV news program. Ochoa said that Quiroz had also reported on a case of police brutality in San Pedro. He said Quiroz had received a death threat on his cell phone in October and had traveled from San Pedro to Sucre to report the threat to the police and to the local office of the Attorney General. He was a part-time journalist for Noticias, a nightly cable TV news program in Sincero. In an interview conducted the next day from his hospital bed, Quiroz told Noticias that officers put him on a police truck. Then, he said, a policeman grabbed me, beat me, and threw me from the moving vehicle. The interview was the last Quiroz gave before he died. Juan Javier Ortega Reyes, a reporter for the Quito Daily El Comercio, was killed between April 10 and 12, 2018, along with the other two members of his reporting team, in southwest Colombia. He was 32 years old. Ortega, photographer Paul Rivas and their driver Efrain Segarra were abducted on March 26, 2018, by a dissident drug trafficking group in the Ecuadorian border village of Matage. In a news conference in Quito on April 13, Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno confirmed that Ortega, Rivas, and Segarra had been killed by their captors earlier that week. Ortega had worked for El Comercio for 6 years, primarily covering politics, crime, and human rights. In February 2018, Ortega wrote several articles investigating security threats, displacement, and drug trafficking near Ecuador's border with Colombia, the region where he and his co-workers were later abducted. Community radio station Samaniego Estati Rio. On the day he was killed, Montenegro interviewed a local journalist about an event in Samaniego to promote peace and human rights amid a rise in violence in the region, according to Flip, who spoke with his colleague. Nariño Governor Camilo Romero declared on Twitter, "Local journalism is in mourning," and Fernando Carrillo, the Colombian government's inspector general, called the killing an attack on press freedom. Luis Antonio Peralta Cuellar, 63, was shot 3 times in the head by 2 gunmen who entered his home around 6 p.m. Peralta's wife, Sofia Quintero, was shot in the arm during the attack, Canacu said. She died from complications related to her injuries a few months later, 8 days before he was killed. Peralta told Canacu that he had received threats, but that he did not want to discuss them over the phone. The 2 men had planned to meet to discuss the details, Canacu said. The day before Peralta was killed, he announced he would run in the October election for mayor of Doncello. Victims of Colombia's long-running guerrilla conflict. Lezama also worked as a film consultant to the Iraqi government, according to the newspaper. Colombian press freedom organization Foundation for Press Freedom, FLIP, issued a statement disputing Alvarado's claim and calling on authorities to investigate connections between the filmmaker's killing and his documentary work.